Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin and whether or not the bottom is in because we are seeing that dip just below $40,000, which is something that I've mentioned here over the past few weeks. And so if we look at the daily chart, you can see where Bitcoin is finally starting to come into that area right around $40,000. We are seeing a nice bounce here over the past hour. So the question now is the low in, or could we see Bitcoin move a bit lower before that bottom is finally in? And the reason why I always thought that a move down toward 42 and potentially below it was possible, if not likely, is because of what we've seen from BTC over the past 12 months. So every time we have a liquidation event like this, designated by these red arrows, and by liquidation event, what I'm talking about is a candle, a big red candle where you see a long lower wick because you get this cascade of liquidations before you get the bounce later in the session. So you can see here these red arrows. You have this large red candle, long lower wick, Bitcoin moves below it and then eventually moves higher again. Same thing 5 other times in 2021. Even May to July, we saw the same exact thing. Same thing here as well. Okay, so far, Bitcoin has moved below 42,000, which was that liquidation low on December 4th. And now we're seeing it test this area just below $40,000. Now, what's interesting about this, and I talked about this last week, but typically when Bitcoin moves below that liquidation low, it tends to move about 4 to 8% below that level before bouncing. So today's low is about 5.7% below 42,000, so it's right in that sweet spot. And so right now we're looking for a bottom. I personally think we're very close to it, if not there. So I did have a few bids filled today with this low. So I've talked about this for a while now, how I had bids set between 40 and 42 and even just below 40. Okay, I have a few bids down here as well, just in case, but I have started to get those bid fills today, even over the weekend. So I am in a long position here, spot only for me. I'm not using leverage right now. And that's just because the market is so sideways right now. I typically don't like using leverage. I very rarely use it. But with the market so sideways right now and so choppy, it just doesn't make sense to. The only time, if you're going to use leverage, and this is just my opinion, but if you're ever going to use leverage, the time to do it is periods like this. All right, when you get these, large, almost parabolic moves, and you get this nice trend that forms, then yes, it's pretty easy to spot these dips and get in there, and you can pretty much just ride it up. But when you get price action like this, that's just going sideways, it's very choppy, and you get this kind of lull in the market where volume dies down, it doesn't make sense to use leverage here, in my opinion. So I'm using spot only with this, with these buys down here between 40 and 42. So take that for what it's worth. Now let's go ahead and talk about potential targets if we do get that bounce from this area. Now I want to be clear that this does not mean that Bitcoin has found a bottom. It does not mean that the bottom is in. We could still see this market move a little bit lower, down toward even 38, 39. And I talked last week too about how if we saw a move below that area, then the next region we'd be looking at is around 35,000. And that's based on this trend line anchored off of the high from the bear market. And also we have a couple of Fibonacci levels that line up right around 35,000. So if you take your fibs from March 2020 up to the all-time high, okay, and then also from these lows down here to the all-time high, you get 2 key Fibonacci levels right at 35,000. So I talked about this in another video where they overlap right at 35. And furthermore, you can see if you turn on the VPVR, which shows you the volume by price. All right, so you can see that the largest area of support of volume that's traded is down here right around 35. Okay, so there is a chance we could see a move down toward 35,000. That is certainly not off the table. And I do have a few bids down there just in case, although, not a lot, just because, again, I do like the idea of a bounce between $38,000 and $40,000. All right, now let's talk about targets if we do get that bounce either from 40,000 or so or down toward 35. Now, if you look at every single time Bitcoin has done this since early 2021, the average bounce following a liquidation event and then that move below the low, okay, every single time it's done this, the average bounce is around 63%. Now, the lowest is 25%, the highest is about 100%. So with the average being 63%, we could very well see Bitcoin move back toward not only 45,000, but up toward 53. Because from today's low, a move from today's low up toward 53 is only about 35%. So the average move here is 63%, as I said. So we could very well see a move up toward 53,000. Now, if we saw something much lower, we could see a reversal from 45 if we did get that bounce sometime this week. But I do think that it's likely for us to see a move up into the 53 area simply because we really didn't test it through here. And I think that this is going to be something that Bitcoin needs to test here over the next few weeks. It's going to sort of act as a magnet. And the reason for that is because this is the level that Bitcoin needs to reclaim in order to turn bullish again. And markets have a way of testing areas like that because they do tend to act as magnets just because they're hinge in the market. All right. So if we get a bounce from this area down here, my targets are going to be up here around 45 and then also that $53,000 area. Now it's going to take a close above 53,000 for Bitcoin to turn bullish again on a macro level. So as long as it's below 53, then I would expect to see a lower macro high develop, okay, and potentially a move down into 35 eventually, because it's going to take a close above 53 to really reverse this downtrend that has been in place since the all-time high. So that's what it comes down to, is just reversing that downtrend. And in order to do that, you need to see higher highs and higher lows, and that would start with a close above 53. So until that time, the downtrend is intact, and I would be very careful about getting too bullish here. I am bullish right now for a bounce up into 45 and potentially 53, as I said, but I'm not looking for something like we saw back here, where we're just going to get a move, past 70 and then straight up again. I don't think we're in that environment right now. It could change into that environment, and I'll explain why in a later video. But right now, I do think that we could see at least a few more months of sideways price action. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about Ethereum now, because we did mention this one last week, and I think a lot of people tend to forget about Ethereum just because everybody looks to Bitcoin as far as trying to gauge where the crypto market is as a whole. But we have to remember that Ethereum is the number 2 coin, obviously, and so it does matter when we're trying to determine the health of the overall crypto market. Okay, so on Friday I talked about how the mid-range right around 28, maybe 2,900 would be a key factor. And the reason for that is not only is it the mid-range, so you can see from 1,700 up to the all-time high, we have the 50% right here around 2880. And then also look at all these highs back here and also these lows. Now we haven't quite seen Ethereum test that level. It came close today, but not quite. So this is another reason that makes me think that we could see a little bit lower for Bitcoin, potentially down toward like 38, maybe 38.5, and Ethereum down into 2,800 or so, maybe 2,900 before we get that bounce. Okay, there's no guarantee of that, but we could see it. Now, the alternative to that would be Ethereum closing back above 3,170. So I talked about this last week as well, and if you look back here, you can see where this area served as support and then resistance a little bit later. Now, look at the price action here over the past few days. You saw this area serve as support on this candle. We then got the close below it over the weekend, and this area right around 3,170 has served as resistance. So the alternative to a move down here is going to be Ethereum closing back above this area, flipping it back to support, and then we likely see that move up into 3,600, which is going to be resistance. So whether we get that move down here into 28 or 29 for Ethereum, that could confirm that the bottom is in for Bitcoin. And the same thing if we got a close above 3,170. If we get a daily close above this area, then that could also confirm that the bottom is in, or at least very close, for Bitcoin. So be sure to use both of these markets when you're trying to gauge the overall market. And one last thing too, let's look at Ethereum against Bitcoin, because this is also something that we talked about last week, where we had this triangle pattern that's developed ever since May. We saw the close above it back here. And what I said last week is as long as 0.075 is intact, then it is support and we should see ETH BTC move higher. Now, what we saw on Friday, actually on Saturday, I believe, was we got the close below this level at 0.075. And right now, this market is trading back below that area. So this signals that this up here was a false break as of now. So unless this down here is the false break, I'm going to assume that this was a false break up here, which means that a lot of times when you get a false break to one side of a pattern, you often see an extended move in the opposite direction. So for ETH BTC, that means that we could start to see this market move lower, and it really could start to unravel here down toward support, which is just above 0.06. Okay, so as of right now, this is a false break up here, so we could start to see ETH BTC move lower, in which case, if you're trying to decide between Bitcoin and Ethereum, as far as which one to buy, my opinion is I'm going for Bitcoin. I do have a few bids for Ethereum set, and a couple of them have been filled, but for the most part, I'm buying Bitcoin here just because of what Ethereum versus Bitcoin is showing me. So I do think that Bitcoin is likely to outperform Ethereum as long as it's below this area up here around 0.075. So in summary, guys, going back to Bitcoin, I do like the idea of a bounce from here in this region. You can see where the market is actually starting to bounce a little bit more as I'm making this video. So if today can close back above 42,000 or so, in fact, the market's really getting kind of crazy right now. We're seeing a pretty large bounce here. So if this market can get back above $42,000 today, okay, we get a close above this area, that would be the first step in confirming the bottom. And then from there, 45 is going to be resistance, close above that, and we're looking at a move probably up toward 53,000 or so. All right, so a lot of my bids have filled. I have a few a bit lower just in case, but as I've said, I like the idea of a move higher from this area down here up to those levels that I discussed, okay? So I hope that this video has helped you guys, and if it has, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and also leave your comment below. I do try to make it a point to respond to every comment. All right, guys, so I hope that this has helped, and I will talk to you soon.